Well, good evening, everybody. Welcome. Thank you for tuning into my webinar. You're all muted, which means I can't hear any of you if you speak, but there is a little box where you can type in questions. So if you've got any questions, you can just type those in, and as soon as I notice them, I'll answer them. What I'm going to do then over the next sort of hour is I'm going to go through my presentation, and I'm going to treat it as if you were just an audience. So I'll say more or less everything that I would say if there was an audience of people who wanted to know about hypnotherapy and improving their performance at a particular sport. The only difference will be that your questions will be much better than a normal audience, or certainly harder for me to answer anyway. Okay, I'm going to talk slowly for the first little while because I assume that more people will join us. We've got 23 people who've signed up for this, which I'm quite pleased about. Okay, I do have an agenda. It seems much longer than it needs to be, but I'll do a little introduction, some talk about the brain, which will probably be revision for many of you. Talk about confidence, relaxation. I'm going to talk about motivation. I'm going to talk about concentration, visualization, negative beliefs, and finally a little bit about being in the zone, which is the current sort of buzz phrase. It's a bit like Star Wars, Luke Skywalker feeling the Force. So that's kind of the plan. Like I say, if you've got any questions at any time, then just type them into the little box and I'll respond as soon as I notice them. Right, start off with the introduction. Now, it's very difficult, being very British, for me to put up all these things. You know, why am I so clever? Why am I here? And yet the first rule of being good at your sport or good at anything is to keep recapping on your successes. So if you're doing swimming, then you're going to recap on every time you've won. You're not going to worry about the times that you didn't. You're only going to focus on the good things. That's what's going to be at the front of your mind, the times that you got in the water and succeeded. Same for runners. You're going to remember the races. Same for any sport. You're only going to think about the successes. That's what's going to be in your brain. That's how your brain's going to be constructed around success. So my successes then, just quickly, I'm a hypnotherapy master practitioner. I'm a solution-focused hypnotherapy supervisor. I'm an NLP master practitioner, and I'm on the exec of the AFSFH. I'm head of IT. So when I see that, I suddenly think, oh yes, perhaps I should be the kind of person who's giving a presentation. So same for all your sporty people. Get them to remember their successes, whatever they are. Even if it's just sort of 10 meters backstroke, it's a success. Get it in their brains. Get it to the front of their minds. So I've done a lot of work with someone called Stephanie Millwood. Now, she was one of the awarded the most medals at the Paralympics in 2012. But you probably don't know her because she didn't get a gold. She got loads and loads of silvers and one bronze. As you can see, she would have been in I think it was the Sydney Olympics in 2000, but she got MS. And so she found she couldn't see, she couldn't walk, she couldn't do anything. But as time passed, she managed to regain her movement, and if you looked at her now, you think, well, it's pretty much a normal person. So I've been working with her. An interesting thing about her, she's a swimmer. She's a top-class swimmer, a world-class swimmer, and she's frightened of water. When she was a little girl, she fell in the pool, and so she was scared of water. So being good parents, they gave her swimming lessons, and she got quite good. But now she still has an issue. So for swimmers, if you're doing any stroke really. You get to the far end, you do a tumble turn, you come off under the water. Now for backstroke, her issue was that she was under the water and her whole body, her whole primitive brain was saying to her, come up, you need you to breathe. And her intellectual brain was saying, no, it's all right, you know, I've swum rather a lot, I'll be fine. But her primitive brain was winning. So you've got something like 10 meters that you can stay underwater. If you think of submarines, they can go faster under the water than they can when they're on the surface. So for swimmers, the longer they stay underwater from a push-off, then the faster their time. So I was working with her particularly on that. Particularly so that rather than just doing the turn, doing a couple of kicks and coming up, she was able to stay under almost the whole of that 10 meters. And you have to be careful. You need to come up before you reach the flags, otherwise you're disqualified. So we were working on that. We also did some visualizations. Her left hand was slightly weaker insofar as it wasn't going into the water in the right way. It was slightly at an angle rather than being sort of flat onto the water, so she got the maximum pull. So these are the things I was working with her, and it's some of the stuff that we've worked on together that I'm going to be talking about tonight, and they can be applied to just about everyone. And there are some pictures. Yes, if you thought I looked like a young Brad Pitt, there you can see an actual picture of me standing next to my banner, and the girl with all the medals round her neck is Stephanie. And like most of you, I've met Glenn Catley, and there's a photograph of me with him. And again, he was someone who used hypnosis to get to the top of his sport. So these are the things that sports hypnosis can be used for. So reinforced established sporting goals. You know, we're solution-focused people. You know that goals are important. You need them to be at the front of your mind. You need to know what you're working towards. Increased motivation, of course, making you want it more. Improved bodily awareness. For most sports, you need to know what your body's doing. I mean, I could ask you a question. I could ask you how many senses you had. And I guess most people would answer, probably 5. That sounds like a good number. But in fact, you've got more than that. And one of your senses is your proprioceptors that actually tell you where your body is. So for many sports, you need to have your legs in the right place. So you're making a nice base. So you're really strong base with your legs for your arms to do whatever they're doing. And again, you need to know what they're doing. It's this kind of bodily awareness that you can bring to the fore, bring to the front of people's minds. Handle nervousness. This is like so many things. When it comes to the big meetings, people often go completely off the boil because they're nervous. And managing stress because you're worried about that big event, and of course therefore you need to be able to relax. Concentrate better is good, because if you're not concentrating, you're not going to be focused, you're not going to score so well. Ignoring distractions. Now, if you go to a local sports event, there's probably a couple of mums and dads or whatever on the sideline encouraging people. But if you go to a big event, and for swimming particularly, where everyone's indoors, there's no soft furnishings to absorb the sound, it's very, very loud and it can be very distracting. So you can use hypnotherapy to help people deal with those kind of sounds, to ignore the distractions. And most sports come with some kind of a pain. Whatever you're doing, you're pushing yourself to the maximum. So what do you do with the pain? Do you stop? No, because you want to be the top. So you've got to control the pain. And so these are the kind of things that you can do with sports hypnosis. But we'll talk about more of those in a moment. So, how does the brain work? Well, I feel very much that I'm teaching my grandmother to suck eggs here, but let me run over it fairly quickly and let me highlight a couple of the things that are really important for sports people. So, we're using the sort of triune brain model. So you know, not shown on my picture here, that you've got your brain stem, This is the most primitive part of the brain. This is what you get in fish, just sort of lumpy bits at the end of the spinal cord. This is the clever bit that does stuff like making sure your heart beats, making sure you're breathing, making sure your eyes respond to light. You've probably seen it in those police dramas or hospitals where they go up to someone who's collapsed on the floor, open their eyes and see whether they respond to light. You've also got in there the area that switches messages from the left side of the brain to the right side of the body and the right side of the brain to the left side of the body. And in there you've got a thing that turns off messages getting through to the large muscles while you're asleep. So when you dream, you don't kick your legs up and move your arms and things like that. Okay, that's the first bit. The next bit is our primitive emotional brain. Now, I want to look at some of the parts of this because they're quite important. So let me start with the thalamus. That's the big sort of yellowy bit there. Now that's important because almost every sensory nerve goes into your thalamus. Everything except smell goes in there. And the number of messages that arrive per second, there are various estimates, but it can be up to something like 13 million messages. So what are you going to do with all that information? Well, most of the time you're going to delete everything that's unimportant so that only the important stuff is going through. Now, when I give this presentation in front of people, I get them to shut their eyes and I say to them, okay, what colour shirt am I wearing? They can go away and think of that. And then I ask them, okay, you know, for bonus marks, what colour tie am I wearing? Well, the thing is, usually when I give this presentation, I'm not wearing a tie at all, and yet there'll still be a few people out there who'll think, oh, perhaps he's wearing a red tie or whatever. The thing is, once you delete the information, it's not there. It's not like a computer system where you can find it at the back of a disk somewhere. It's actually gone, and your brain is very good at creating information. So it'll make up what colour my tie is, even though I'm not wearing it. So all this stuff is going into the thalamus. Lots and lots of messages from your sensory systems. Now underneath that is a tiny little body called the hypothalamus. Now if you speak Greek, you know hypo just means underneath. So the first person to do a dissection of the brain must have lifted up the thalamus and found this lumpy bit underneath and decided to call it the bit underneath the thalamus. So the hypothalamus is important. You can think of it as like a little man with a whole load of controls, and he's trying to keep everything steady inside your body, what they call homeostasis. So when you get hot, he moves the dials to try and cool you down, and that'll be you sweating. When you're cold, he'll turn the dials the other way, which will be you shivering. So that's what it's doing. It's trying to keep everything steady. But it's also got one other important function, and one that affects sports people quite a lot. And this is, it can go up a gear when it thinks you're being threatened. So when that polar bear comes into the room, or when a saber-toothed tiger is nearby, or even when you see a shadow move, suddenly the hypothalamus starts talking to the pituitary gland and saying, oh, I think we're in danger here. And between the two of them, they start sending messages down to your adrenal gland, which produces adrenaline, noradrenaline, and cortisone. And those are the things that get your brain and your body ready for fight and flight. They're the things that cause the blood supply to your stomach and your intestines to reduce, so that it can all go to your muscles of your legs and your arms, so that you're able to run away or to fight. And that's why whenever you're nervous, you always feel butterflies in your stomach, or else you feel, oh, I need to go to the toilet, because it's your body trying to deal with much lower blood supply going to your intestines. Now this is what your sports people are going to find when they go in for a big competition. They're going to feel nervous. It's just a very natural thing of their body getting ready for it. And if you're going to do a sitting down maths exam, you're going to get exactly the same response as if you're going out to play rugby against the All Blacks or whatever. Your body's only got this one sort of response system that it can use. So that's what it does. This is called the HPA axis, the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis. And between them, they just turn up the dials, and you're getting loads of adrenaline, loads of cortisone, all flowing through your body. And you know, with people with anxiety, they're kind of hypervigilant, and they're getting a lot of this anyway. But for your sports people, that's what's making them nervous. And because it's a little man with controls, like I said at the beginning, you can dial them down. You can get people used to exam conditions, competition conditions, and therefore it sort of produces less adrenaline. You always need some. It's like actors who always need a little bit of adrenaline before they go on stage to do that really good performance. What you don't want is too much of it, because then it's hard to control your muscles because they're just ready to sort of fight and flight. Okay, moving on, we've got our amygdala. Wonderful word, amygdala. It's Greek for almond, because if we were to look at the brain, it's an almond-shaped organ. Now that, as we know, is very, very useful when we're scared, because that's basically where fear lives. Why is it important? Because again, when we feel threatened, our amygdala begins to take control, and you've got a thing that they're calling amygdala hijack. Now, picture the scene. You're sitting down in the classroom at school, and the incredibly mean and horrible maths teacher comes up and stands behind you and says, "Well, tell me, what are 8 sevens?" And the reason your mind goes a blank isn't because you haven't learnt your tables. It's because you can't use any other part of your brain, because you're suffering from amygdala hijack. All you can feel is that sense of fear. And so you won't be able to come up with a logical or sensible answer. And the same thing can happen with your sports people. They can get amygdala hijack, where the whole of their brain is just taken over with a sense of fear and foreboding, and they won't be able to do whatever sport it is that they're doing. And yeah, our friend there, the hippocampus, is the bit that we use for memory. And the length of your hippocampus seems to affect how good your memory is, how good you are at storing memories in the first place. Okay, so that is all part of our primitive brain. That's sort of pretty much the limbic system. And that's what you've got if you're a simple mammal like a dog or a cat or a horse. You've just got that bit and then a teeny tiny bit of cerebral cortex around the outside. So the function then of that middle bit, that limbic system, is what they call the 4 Fs. So it's good for feeding, it's good for flight, it's good for fighting, and it's also quite keen on reproductive behavior. So moving on, you've got a layer between the limbic system and the cerebral cortex. Then you've got your cerebral cortex, which again comes in different layers. This is the bit that makes us so clever. This is the bit that manages to solve problems for us. It's the bit that helps us maintain attention. And it's the bit that controls the primitive impulses that are coming up from our primitive emotional brain. So it's the bit that kind of gets turned off when you've had 14 pints and think knocking a policeman's hat off is funny. Now that, like I say, helps you problem solve, helps you plan, and that's the bit we're going to use a lot with our visualizations, with our thinking about what we're going to do in a sporting situation. Okay, let's move on. Neural pathways, and underneath I've got two really good words, neurogenesis and neuroplasticity. Let's talk about pathways first of all. Your brain is made up of almost 3 pounds worth of mainly jelly, glial cells, and these kind of just sit there and give your brain its shape. And inside there you've got the neurons, and the neurons are the bit that move, and that's what neuroplasticity is. So if you can't fly an aeroplane at the moment, there's a part of your brain that isn't very full of brain cells. But if you went for flying lessons, then you gradually get more of them. If you've ever learnt a musical instrument to begin with, you won't be very good, but gradually you'll build up connections, which means more and more of these nerve cells will connect, the little dendrites will connect together, and there'll actually be physically more cells there. And your brain also does the thing called tear down, which it does at different stages of its life, where it finds that a number of the sort of pathways it used to use aren't being used anymore, and it'll take those cells away. You can find with children, perhaps at the age of 2 or 3, they're speaking one language, but the family moved to a new country, and they start speaking the language of the children in the school where they go. And sort of when they're 10 or 11, they've got no memory of being able to speak the other language. It's because those cells have been torn down and removed. In fact, they've been repurposed and they're somewhere else. Neural pathways, you can think of them as, imagine that I had 6 buildings around a big grass area, and people came out of the buildings and walked across the grassy area from one building to another. Now, as they walk across that grass, they cause wear, and eventually, after a year perhaps, we'll have clear footpaths going across where people walk. And that's a bit like neural pathways. You'll create these pathways. These are your habits. These are your things you do. Now, if you're learning a new skill, they reckon the more you just let your body do it rather than thinking too much about it, the quicker and easier you'll learn the skill and you'll build these pathways. Now, the problem comes if you learn to play the piano at home and then you go and find a teacher who says, no, you should be holding your hands like this and you should be doing something else. You're actually trying to overlay that original pathway with new pathways. Well, you can do it, and you can keep on doing that, and you can improve the way that you do your sport, because your new trainer is actually getting you to practice it. And the more you practice it, the more you're making connections, the more these little dendrites on the neurons are connecting together. So neuroplasticity allows the neurons inside this big layer of jelly, the glial cells, allows them to move around to where you need them. And they'll be there for when you need them. Neurogenesis is the good news. They used to think that when you got to about 23, that was it. Your brain was formed, and it couldn't change anymore. And then every time you had a few drinks, you'd be destroying brain cells. And that explained why older people sort of didn't really know what was going on because they'd worn out their brain cells. It's not true. Throughout life you can make brain cells. You can teach an old dog new tricks. If you do a little bit of sporty things, that tends to be very good for making brain cells. And when you made new brain cells, they can move around to where you need them, and you can learn your new skill or you can improve on your old skill. Okay, so left prefrontal cortex. This is good. If you're a top sports person and you want to be even more top, then stay in your left prefrontal cortex. Your positive thoughts. It's your successes. It's knowing that today you will be as successful as you've ever been in the past, or more successful. I've got a picture of a monk because it was a monk who let his brain be dissected after he died, and they found that the left prefrontal cortex was bigger, and that means that area of the brain was being used more, so more of these cells had moved there. It was just more going on. So Be positive. The more positive you are, the more likely you are to be successful at your particular sport. Okay, let me move on. Right prefrontal cortex. The picture you're seeing is an extinction level event. That's a big asteroid about to impact on the Earth. Why have we got a function that seems so incredibly negative? You know, what good? Why through evolution would we want to have something that was so awful like that? Well, it isn't awful if you only use it for about 10 minutes. So when you've just done your sporting event, you can go through it. You can analyze it and think what went well, what could be better if. And that's the sort of language to use. You don't say what went badly. You just say what went better if. You try and keep everything positive. And so you give yourself about 10 minutes after an event to just think about it and say, oh, I could improve my performance if I were to do perhaps more practice, perhaps, you know, one particular area or whatever. But your right prefrontal cortex is terrible, really, because of the negative introspection and the negative prediction. So you look back and say, well, you know, I didn't win that event, therefore I'm a loser, therefore I shall go to my next sporting event and be a loser as well. No, you only give yourself a limited amount of time, and then you move across to your left prefrontal cortex, taking what you've learnt with you and moving forward. So there we are. I think I must have stolen this off Facebook. On the left, what most people think, you make a choice and either you become a winner or you become a failure and give up. But the truth is, you try something, well, that's not quite right. You try something else, no, not quite right. You try another thing, ooh, yeah, no, and eventually you get to be a winner. But too many people give up after one or two attempts. Remember Edison, remember the story of Edison, that he had 200 goes at creating a light bulb. And then he succeeded. He could have given up 199 times and thought of himself as a bit of a failure. But no, he did it, and he's known for inventing the light bulb. In fact, when he was being interviewed, the reporters said, well, tell me, Mr. Edison, how does it feel like getting it wrong so many times? And he said, well, I didn't get it wrong. I found 199 ways of not making a light bulb. He was keeping it positive. Always a positive spin. So this is the problem, or the problems, that sporty people often face. Things like choking. Golfers will talk about choking. Dartitis, you'll find that with people who play darts. Come and say, oh, dartitis. Yips, yeah, that's another golfy one. Target panic, that's the one for archers. And there's a whole load of them. Choking is like the general term for these. It's the fact that you just seemingly can't throw that first dart. You can't putt that ball. You can't do it. And over on the right hand side, you can see what the problem is. It's paralysis by analysis. Trips off the tongue. The idea is that you're creating in your brain these habits, these neural pathways. Your brain is building up a pattern. Think of it of driving. Any of you who've tried to teach a child or anyone else how to drive will realize just how difficult it is. You get in the car, you go from A to B, and you don't think about it. But when you're teaching someone, you've suddenly got to think, what am I doing? And this is what's happening with people who are choking like this. They're thinking about it. They're concentrating on their shot. And rather than just running through the neural pathway that knows what to do, they're running it through their intellectual brain and thinking, oh, I need to line it up. I need to get this right. Okay, I've just got a question. Okay, Dorothea Reed has asked, do you have to be really good at the specialist vocabulary for your client's sport? The answer to that is no, because I'm not. There are some sports I know a little bit about because I've done them, but some I don't. I'm talking at the very general level, and I'm going to be giving them techniques that everyone can use. So I don't need to know the ins and outs of golf or whatever sport they're talking about. You know, 10-pin bowling or whatever, crown bowls. I don't need to know angling. I don't need to know anything about it. I just need to know how they can get from where they are now to being better at it. Okay, so that's what happens to them. They tend to be thinking about it rather than just doing it. And this is again a bit like the Luke Skywalker thing of just feeling the force, of just letting themselves get on. I'll show you later on some tips of how to overcome this. Okay, confidence. Confidence is the absolute clear winner on this. People who think that they're going to win, people who think they're going to be successful, just tend to be. Those people who think, oh, I shouldn't really be here, I'm not quite as good as him and I'm not quite as good as them, tend to be not quite as good. You've got to be confident. You've got to think how good you are, and you do that by remembering your successes at each stage. You know, you can remember how good you were at the under-14s, the under-16s, the under-21s, and now you're in the adult game. You're bringing that success with you. Whatever it is, remember always how good you were, and think yourself as being confident. The other thing is, William James, way back in the 1890s, came up with this idea that how you acted affected your body. You've got to realize that your brain is nowhere near as clever as you think it is. And so a lot of the time it's just looking for evidence about what's going on. And if the evidence is that you're kind of walking along with your head down and shuffling, it thinks, oh, I'm not very confident, I'm not very happy, you know, that's how I am. But if you're walking along confidently with your head up, you know, you're looking around at things and people can see that you're looking, see what you're doing, then your brain will think, oh, I'm acting confidently. Right, I am being confident. So we're attacking confidence at two ways. We're attacking it on our thinking, so we're only thinking about good things, and we're attacking it on our behavior, and that's going to affect our emotions as well. Everything about us is going to be confident. Think about the difference between the headmaster when he walks into assembly. There's sort of 500 children staring at him, and he looks like he owns the room, and everyone who's looking at him thinks, oh yeah, he owns the room. That's what you need to do. When you go to a competition, that's where you need to be. I know what I said at the very beginning, it's not very English to do that, but that's the way to behave, because your body will then think, here I am, you know, I am very good, I will perform to an incredibly high standard. So, one of the techniques you can do is you can decide how you want to behave. So I want to behave in this particular way as a very confident person. Then spend a lot of time visualizing yourself doing that. Okay, so not just a quick thought about it, visualize the whole thing, and then imagine yourself stepping into that world, the you being superbly confident. Let me tell you a little story about thinking and skills. There was a basketball team divided up into three groups. One group practiced doing their getting the ball in the net. The other group spent a lot of time thinking about doing it, and the third group just read stuff. And at the end of the week they brought them all back to see how they'd improved. And the group that practiced putting the ball in the net were much better. The group that had thought about putting the ball in the net were much better, and the group that had done something else entirely were exactly the same. So that's the thing about your brain. It cannot tell the difference between you physically doing something and you thinking about it. So this visualization is incredibly important. Let me tell you the story of Michael Phelps. Now, Michael Phelps was a swimmer well, you probably all know, Olympic medalist, multiple Olympic medalist. And one day, before a race, he got up and he went down to the pool and did some lengths. He did his stretches. He did whatever else he did. He got into his competition swimming suit, went for the race. The klaxon went off. He dived in the water, and the next thing he noticed was there was a little bit of water inside his goggles. But he was swimming away, and he got down to the other end, and he couldn't see at all. He touched, and he turned, and he swam back, and he touched the other end. So that was 100 meters race over, and he'd won it. But he hadn't been able to see for about 3/4 of the race. And afterwards, when he was interviewed, one of the reporters said, "What was it like not being able to see when you swam?" And Michael Phelps said, "It was exactly as I imagined it would be." So what he'd done, he'd visualized his whole day. He didn't just visualize the race, he'd visualized the whole day and how he was going to behave through the day, leading up to the race, through the race, to the end of it. He'd also visualized what would happen. So he'd had a whole load of different scenarios, and one of the scenarios that he's rehearsed in his mind was not being able to see. So his goggles filling up with water. I mean, anyone who's swum knows that this happens, even with your top-class sponsored goggles. So he visualized doing that a few times in his head. So when it happened, he just carried on with his sort of, if you think of it in computery terms, he carried on with the subroutine that he'd already programmed into his mind, and he carried on and won the race. He wasn't fazed by it. So what I'm suggesting here is that you visualize your confidence, you step into that, but you also visualize alternatives that might happen. And whichever sport that is, you know, it can be different things. It could be someone running onto the track and sort of getting in the way. It could be all sorts of things. But you just visualize what you think might happen. You don't do it just for the competition. You do it for the whole of the sort of competition day. Okay, too many people, you probably heard them, and they say, "No, I can't do maths," as they sit there and just give up. Lots of sports people say, "Oh, well, you know, I quite enjoy doing whatever my sport is, but I'm no good at it. And last time I had a competition, oh, God, where did I come last? Ha, ha, ha." That's no good. You need to forget the past. We're solution focused. We're future looking. So don't worry about the past. You're only looking at positive goals. You're looking towards the future. I've got a thing about language in a minute about that, which I'll show you. Another way of building your future is spend time with positive people. You don't want to be around people who are going, "No, you know, you probably won't be able to do it. Oh, there's probably someone out there who's better than you," that kind of thing. You want to be with people who are absolutely positive that doing this will make you better. If you can, spend time with experts at your sport. So if you want, it's like the person who comes to you for weight control, and you say to them, you know, "Are you going to the gym?" And they'll perhaps say, "Oh, yes," but when they go to work, they're still spending time with people who are opening bars of chocolate and eating them. They need to spend time with people who go out for a run, people who come back and say, "Oh, yeah, and I'm doing 8.5-minute miles now," you know, and because they're experiencing that. Your brain, picture your brain as a house. But it's a very special house where you can actually move the rooms round. So for some people, the biggest rooms are like the lounge, and the sofa's incredibly big and the TV's incredibly big. Whereas other people, the lounge is quite small, but their in-house gymnasium is very big. It's where you focus your time. And if you spend time with people who say, "Oh, well, I thought I might go to the gym today, but you know, there's that good program on TV, so I didn't." That's no good. You need to be with people who say, "Oh, yeah, you know, I had a bit of a cold, but I still went out for a run, and I was quite pleased. You know, my time for the 10K, you know, it was under an hour, so that was okay." That's what you need to do. You need to be with positive people. You need to be with people who are good at your sport, so that when they talk about it, they're talking about it in very positive terms. And for you, whoever you're talking to train with this, they need to have clear and definite goals. It's no good being woolly. It's no good thinking, oh, I'd quite like to be a little bit better at this, whatever it is. If you're a runner, then you've got a time. If you're doing a whole marathon, then you might say, I need to do it within 4 hours or 3 hours, or if you're an absolutely top runner, 2 hours and 10 minutes or whatever. And that's your goal. You're only thinking in clear goals. Now, this is the question. This is the most powerful question there is to ask anyone who does any sport. What would have to be different for you to achieve your goal? And when they think about that, they're actually thinking about the solution. This is the miracle question for sports people. What do they have to do? Maybe it's get a new racket. Maybe it's get new running shoes. Maybe it's whatever. Maybe there's more than one thing that would need to be different. Maybe they need to get up half an hour earlier to go out running. Maybe they need to change their diet and eat more superfoods and fewer takeaways. I don't know. But that's the question that you ask them. And then you can ask them, what else, what else, what else? Okay, I'm just taking another question. Okay, Lucy Gilroy has asked, could a goal be as simple as something like, I just want to improve my golf swing or tennis serve? No, it can't. That's kind of a woolly goal. Your goal is actually be to get 90% of your serves inside the box, something that's measurable. Remember, we're kind of looking for a smart target with these. So, yeah, to be better is what it will be. But in order to measure that, you need to have some numbers. So the golf swing may be that they need to be able to hit over the 200-yard mark, or something like that, depending on where they are in their skill level. But it needs to be something that's measurable. Otherwise, how do you know you've actually achieved it? Relaxation's good. Relaxation is incredibly important. You can't be sort of ready for a sporting occasion the whole time. You need to be able to turn off. You need to clear your body of the adrenaline, of the cortisone. So laughing is one of the most powerful things you can do. It's good. It's good for your immune system. So go out and enjoy yourself. Do things that are fun. I mean, you don't necessarily have to eat the wrong kind of foods or drink too much or anything like that. You can just go out with people, go and see a film or whatever, anything that's going to be, good for you and help you relax. And that whole relaxation thing increases your positivity, your optimism, and your resilience. And so, yeah, laughing is one of the easiest ways of doing that. Yeah, you can watch comedy shows, or you can just be with friends, because that usually starts with, a lot of laughter. So laughter is good. You need to relax. But there's two parts to this. There's the relaxing when you're away. So you can completely relax when you're away from the competition. But at the competition, it's very easy as you sort of drive up and into the car park ready for whatever sporting occasion it is, to start sort of getting tense, and to be tense for a long time. Now you think like a football match lasts 90 minutes with a break in the middle, so sort of 2 hours. It's still a long time to be tense. Other competitions can go on all day. Swimming competitions particularly, you can be doing heats in the morning, sort of semis in the afternoon and finals the next day. You can be doing it a long time. You cannot keep up that kind of level of concentration. So you need to be able to relax at competition. And it also gives you a huge advantage over your opponents when they see you being relaxed. One thing a lot of competitors do these days is they plug in their headphones and they listen to music, and they will have like an anchor on a particular sound. So maybe they're listening to their favorite Beatles songs from 40 years ago or whatever. When they're doing that, they know that they need to calm down. They need to reduce their heart rate, slow down their breathing, just get everything reduced, ready for when it goes up again for the actual event. You can do that, and you'll see people do that. You'll see people changing their clothes. You know when you put on your blue tracksuit that allows you to relax a little bit. And you can also help clients to be relaxed just for that period when they're waiting. If they're runners, then they're on the track, they're taking off their kit. There's a period of time when they're kind of ready to start, but they're not being marshaled to actually get on the blocks. Same with swimmers, there's a period like that. Same with most competitors. There's a period when you're just about ready to do it, but you've got that little sort of break before you actually go up and do it. So you need to stay calm. What Stephanie, my swimmer, did was she managed to stay calm all the time, even when she got in the water for like a backstroke competition. She would be calm until she grabbed hold of the rail, ready to start. And that's when they were marshalled. And then she'd let her adrenaline level go right up, so that when when the lights changed and the klaxon went and she was swimming, she was sort of maxing out on adrenaline and ready to really push. But before that, she could stay nicely cool right up, whereas some people, you can see them getting quite sort of twitchy and edgy before she got to that stage. Okay, motivation theories. No, there isn't enough time to go through them all, but you can see there are a lot. So that means that no one really quite understands motivation. I'm not going to talk about them. I'm not going to talk about sort of cognitive dissonance theories or anything like that. I just want to highlight a little bit about Maslow and a little bit of something very similar, the incentive theory, which is quite simple. Now, the simplest motivation, and I've done it with different size fonts for a reason, we're all motivated to go away from harm. We're motivated to avoid bad things, and that is a big driver. That's what's kept humans alive. That's how we've managed to pass on our genes, because we've avoided harm. We run away. And there's a smaller one, which is towards reward. Now, towards reward is the bit that you need to use, because you're not going to threaten anyone. You're not like the maths teacher with the big stick. You're going to help them do good behaviour, so you're working on towards reward. I'm just going to answer this question. Matthew Dennis has asked, is there a difference between being calm, being too calm, and stifling the input of neurotransmitters? Yeah, there probably is, and there's probably only one way of working this out, is actually going to an event. You can dissociate. That's what some people do. They manage to separate themselves, as though they're turning their brain off from all those senses that are coming in, and they avoid it. But you can only work out the right time for you to sort of start turning on the adrenaline, the actual excitement of the event. So your client, whoever you're seeing, will need to work that out themselves. When's the best time to stop being calm and start building up? You can see it. Rugby players used to do it a lot before they went out, when they were all ready to go out onto the pitch. But before they actually came out of the dressing rooms, they used to sort of punch themselves and punch each other, because it was their way of getting themselves ready for what would be a hard physical game. Well, it's no good in that situation if you're keeping yourself calm. You need to go out there ready to, ready to play rugby. So yes, there is a difference, and working out what's right for you will depend on your client. So humans are hugely motivated by moving away from harm. Your work is always going to be on the towards rewards bit. Okay, no, I don't want to say that yet. Whoops, let's go back. One other thing, just picking up on the Maslow thing. What makes you a top performer on anything is having had a good night's sleep. So make sure that your clients are getting sleep. make sure that they sort of plan their sleep in. So if they know that they only need 5 hours sleep, that they get their 5 hours. If they need 10 hours sleep, you know, they're a student or whatever, then make sure that they plan that in to getting ready for the event. Sleep is one. Exercise is another important thing for most clients. Well, if we're dealing with sporty people, they're probably getting the exercise. And the third one is food. They need to make sure that they're eating properly. They're eating enough of the right foods. Now, depending on what sport they're doing, it could be a high-protein diet, but they still need to make sure they're getting their carbohydrates. They still need to make sure they're getting their essential fats. It's good to eat fish. It's good to eat vegetables and fruit, but you need to make sure they're eating the right things for their sport. Weightlifters are probably eating a very high-protein diet. It's going to be, different for different people. So the three things that are in the bottom bit of the Maslow pyramid are sleep, eat, and exercise. If you do those, you feel fit, healthy, and well enough to go and do your sport. If one of those three isn't quite right, you're probably not very good. And that's, oops, where am I going? That's what's happening with a lot of the people that we see, that they're getting one of those three wrong. But for sports people, you need them to be at the peak of condition, so they need to be getting those right. Okay, so thinking about this, I need to have a vision board. It's the best thing you can do for your sports person to know exactly what it is they want to achieve. And a vision board is good because you can stick it on the fridge, or you can stick it on the front of the biscuit cupboard. It doesn't matter, as long as they see it all the time. They see what their vision is. This is where I'm going. I am going to be able to hit that golf ball 250 yards, whatever. It says state the goal in sensory terms. Now, NLP is very keen on sensory terms. So what does it feel like? What does it sound like? What does it look like? It could be what does it smell like as well. But they're the things that are going to be in your vision board. Your goal is going to feel like this. It's going to look like this. It's going to sound like this. And that could be, you know, the crowd cheering my performance. It's, you know, whatever. But that's part of how you're going to state your goal, with all those internal things, what you can see, what you can hear, what you feel, etc. So to get to that goal from here, what resources do I need? And it could be a list. Maybe you need a new bow, maybe you need new shoes, maybe whatever. Or maybe you've got everything now, you just need time to go and practice. And then the idea is you have a kind of a timeline. Now for my swimmer, it's 2016 in Rio. Everything is building up to that. That is where she wants to be to get the gold in the Paralympics. So that's her timeline, and everything works back from that, what she needs to do. So she needed to get her turn right. She needed to get her left hand going in the water right. She needed to do a couple of other things. But that's your timeline. Work out. You can't do it all overnight. It's like, think of it as a revision timetable. If you've got children who are doing GCSEs or A-levels at the moment, they've got a revision timeline that they've only got so many days and so many subjects to revise. They need to divide it up on what they're going to do. And of course it needs to be manageable. You know, I may have on my timeline that I'm going to run 100 meters in 8.9 seconds tomorrow morning. Well, that's totally unmanageable. Your job is to work with your clients, work with people to make it manageable, so they can make the appropriate improvements for their goal time. And then looking at the steps, that's the little steps. You know, the longest journey begins with a single step. What steps do they need to do? So by Friday, I will be able to run a mile. By the following Friday, I'll be up to 1.5 miles, and then in a month's time, I'll be able to do 3 miles. You know, and might be able to do a 10K race, and hopefully I'll be able to do it in, you know, whatever time I set myself. So that's your vision board. That is absolutely important. What does it sound like? What does it look like? What does it feel like? How do I need to get there? What do I need, and when? People talk to themselves, and some people say, "Oh, I mustn't something. You know, I don't want to do that," and that's wrong. So you never use those kind of negative things. Remember, your brain can't tell a negative. So if it's don't drop the ball or whatever, then drop the ball is what I'm going to do. It's always got to be positive. So this is what I'm going to do. I am going to the shop tomorrow to buy my new shoes. I am going out running in the evening. I am going to get a stopwatch. I am going to be able to do that race in a particular time. So always be positive. Remember, back in the sort of 60s and 70s, there used to be anti-war rallies and things. They don't do that anymore. They have peace rallies. And this is the way sort of people have recognized this sort of language thing. It's got to be positive. It's got to be what you want. It's the direction you're going in. And again, if you're hanging around with good people, and even if you're not, if you're just watching them on television, see what they do, model it. And modeling in this case is where you act just like they're acting. So you imagine how they do it. You imagine what they're thinking, how it feels for them, what they can hear, what they're thinking. All of that, that's a big picture of your hero doing the sport. And then you kind of step into that. And again, you let that whole sort of feeling, what you can hear, what you can see, what you can feel, all just fill you. So you know then, when you go and do your sport, that's how you want to feel. That's what it should sound like. And, you know, whatever level they're at, then they need to model themselves on someone who's better than that. There's no point, if you're a beginner, modelling yourself on sort of Jenson Button if you want to be motor racing. You've got to always do it on someone who's a bit better. Excuse me, a bit better. And that way you're kind of stepping into what they do, and then you're doing it as well. So if you do exactly what they do, you should be equally as good as they are. And when you're that good, you look for your next model and your next model. And when you get to being almost the very best, then you kind of create a model of how you would be when you are the best. And that's the one you step into and see how it feels and act like it when you're at an event. So your visualizations then. When I worked with Stephanie, we looked at this tumble turn and the push off and the kicking her legs really hard underwater but not really using her arms until she came up and straight into that first stroke. And for her, she couldn't see very much, she couldn't hear very much, but she could feel what it was like. She could feel how her body was. There was that sort of smell of ozone-y, chlorine, and there was a slight taste of that. But these are NLP, they're called submodalities. But for most other sports, when you're not under the water, there are things you can see, are things that you can hear, and they're very important. And with Stephanie, we did it at normal speed, and we also did it at very slow speed. And for someone who's scared of water and picturing herself being underwater and wanting to come up, doing it in slow motion was fantastically useful, because we could make that sort of 10 seconds or whatever, we could make that last 30 seconds, sometimes as long as a minute. And then when she did it in real, at full speed, it was so much easier, because her brain was building these connections of what it would be like were she to stay under the water for longer. And that worked really well. Okay, overcoming negative beliefs. I'm conscious of the time. Most people come with negative beliefs. Most people tend to have negative beliefs thrust upon them. You know, their chums will say, oh, well, you know, you weren't very good when X and Y happened, and they'll just keep remembering them, and that will be the joke. That's what they'll laugh about. That's what you've got to get rid of. You know, you can do it. That's why you're coming to see me. Don't think anything negative. Just focus on the positive goals. Don't worry about it. Just forget it. And the Dickens process, I don't know if you've come across this before. You're certainly familiar with the book, Christmas Carol. Charles Dickens wrote that. And in that, Scrooge has got a choice to carry on as he is and make no changes, and then he ends up in a grave all on his own and nobody cares. Or he can make changes and he becomes a sort of popular person. And so that's the choice. That's what you offer your client. The Dickens choice. Either they carry on as they are and they stay as they are, or they want to make changes. So you get them to visualize what it would be like in, it could be 6 months' time and then a year's time when they've made their changes. And they can see they're visualizing themselves being better at their sport and then being much better at the sport. And that's the kind of choice they take. It's like being at a junction on a road. You can either go left or you can go right, and sort of left is still the same, right is where things get better and better. And because they're visualizing it, because they can see their future, they can sort of see their way towards their goal. Just quickly then, I'm conscious of the time, just a little bit about getting in the zone. This is by a guy called Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, and you can see I wrote it down at the bottom how to pronounce it because it's an unusual name for me. Flow then is this mental state where you're actually sort of totally immersed in what you're doing. Not only are you immersed in it, you're doing it so brilliantly because you're totally energized, and at the end of it you've really enjoyed it. It's just filled your whole brain with your sport. That's the sort of definition of flow. There's a 2013 sort of extra bit which kind of spells it out nicely. Knowing what to do. Well, a top sports person will. Someone who's just working their way up will be looking at their coach to give them more hints and tips on what to do. But when they're in the zone, when they're in the flow, they know what they're doing. You can see it with tennis players when they're playing. They're almost doing it automatically. They're kind of reading the ball and they're moving sort of towards the middle and then in whichever direction they think the ball will be, ready to hit it back. They know how to do it. They've practiced so often that they can do backhands, forehands, or whatever it is for their sport. But they're also giving themselves feedback. They know how well they're doing. They know when they need to up their game. Knowing where to go, that depends on your sport. I mean, obviously, if you're a racing driver, then you need to know where you're going. If you're doing darts, then you just need to know which direction the board is, because there's not much more navigation involved. The thing is, the challenge of doing it well is high. I mean, we've perhaps all been in the pub and played darts, and it doesn't really matter whether you get doubles or triples or whatever. But for this, you can see that doing it successfully, it's a high skill job and there's a lot of challenge involved. People do sailing things. You can really see that there's so much challenge there. But when they do it, they're free from distraction. And that's the final one of the points. They're just focused on what they're doing. The rest of the world has disappeared. It's as though they're inside a bubble, inside a sort of cocoon, but being very active doing their sport. Three things then I do with clients. Relaxing, getting them to relax is really important. Anchoring, anchoring is a technique where you get them to do an action, a physical action that links with a particular feeling. So you can get them to rub their thumb and middle finger together, and that reminds them of what they remember feeling like, or they imagine feeling like being really confident and really successful is. So you create a link between the feeling and the action. That's creating the anchor. And whenever they need it, you can do it with children going in for exams. You want them to feel confident and successful even when they're getting butterflies in their stomach as they wait outside the maths exam. But then you can get them to rub their ear, rub their arm, and whatever it is, it's got to be an action that's fairly natural, but not one that they do all the time. And when they do that, then they will recreate in their body that feeling. So if you're a sports person, it will be confidence and being successful. Oops. I've just got a question here from Richard Lepper. If the thalamus and amygdala gets the sensory info first, 15 seconds earlier than the cortex, is it possible to use this by trusting instincts and getting into the zone? Yes, absolutely. one of the problems with sort of the yips, etc., is that you're thinking about it. You're using the intellectual part of your brain. You're trying to get it right. What you need to do is take steps to use just the memory, just these links between the neurons that know how to do it. So yeah, it's not an instinct in the sense that it's a natural instinct. It's a learnt habit, and that's what you're trusting, that you're going to do it right, and you don't really think about it. You just do it, and that's what successful sports people are doing. You can watch the top tennis people doing it. They're not thinking about it. There's a thing that if I throw a ball in the air, you're almost always going to catch it, or you'll get very close to catching it. Now, how do you do that? Do you use your intellectual brain and work out the angle of flight and do some maths about the speed of gravity and how quickly it'll come down and where it'll come down? Or, like most cricketing fielders, do you just run a rule of thumb, a heuristic, which says as long as I keep the angle between me, my eye and the ball the same, I will catch it? And they do that by running towards the ball, and they're there. And that's how you catch things, not by using your intellectual brain to work it out, just by using the kind of rule of thumb that when you were 4, 5, 6 and learning to catch, you built up. So yeah, keep it down. Use your primitive brain because it's fast. It will link into these habits and just pull them back. Okay, and act as if, this again is sort of William James, if you're acting like you're doing well, even if you're not at the time, your brain will say, oh, no, my body says I'm doing well, I'll just keep on doing well. And you will see a huge improvement in performance if you just act as if you are the right person doing the right sport at the right time. Ah, okay, questions. Oh, hang on, did I miss a slide? Ah, yes, concentration. Sorry, this is the one I missed, and I knew I needed to talk about this quickly. Always practice under pressure. You see youngsters who are revising for exams and they're lying on their bed listening to music. It's no good, because when they do exams, they have to sit in exam rooms with hardly any noise going on at all. So same for your sports people. Get them to practice in simulated event conditions. Then when they go to the events, it will seem quite normal, and therefore you won't get so much of that HPA axis stuff going on. Distract yourself. This is how you avoid the yips. This is what you need to do. People sing to themselves, and therefore you're keeping your intellectual brain occupied by thinking what's the next word, what's the next note, and you're just going straight into those habits which you practiced and practiced and practiced, so you do them well. You see some people, a lot of sports you can do this, you just keep saying smooth, 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 and then if you're doing archery, you're releasing the string on the bow smoothly. If you're hitting a golf ball, it's smooth. If you're playing snooker, it's smooth. Even a shooting event, it's smooth as you pull the trigger. So distract yourself, don't slow down. If you slow down, then you're likely to go up into your intellectual brain and you get paralysis by analysis. So that's why your second dart goes quite well when your first darts hit the ground, because you're then throwing them automatically and quite quickly. Yeah, here's the mantra using the word smooth. And for golfers, sometimes just change your grip. Sometimes do something a bit different, because then the intellectual part of your brain can be thinking about, oh, what am I doing with my grip? And then the rest of your brain is just hitting the ball as well as you can. And lastly, be positive. Always think about your really good hits of the ball, not the times when it went all over the place. Okay, questions. We're a little over time, but if anyone's got any questions now, or else you can put them on the Facebook group, or you can email me. Have you got any questions? Okay, all right. Well, like I say, if you think of any questions, then just get in contact with me. Oh, there's one. Richard Lepper says, so we want to use the primitive brain without anxiety. Yeah, what we're doing is we're using the primitive brain to access our habits rather than using our intellectual brain to rethink of them. Again, it's the same when you're learning a sport. You just want to let the habits kind of grow in your brain. You just want to make the connections. You don't want to overthink it. Okay, thank you, Ismail Kumar. Yeah, thanks, Alex. It is recorded, and I will be putting it up somewhere, so there'll be a link to this afterwards. It takes it about half an hour to convert it into a usable file, so it'll probably be tomorrow when I do this. Okay, well, thank you all very much, and yeah, I imagine you can count this as an hour's worth of training or something. But been a pleasure for me. I hope you've all enjoyed it, and thank you all very much.